Imagine a world where history unfolded differently, a world where destinies were drawn in tortuous and dark lines. This is the world we explore today, a world where the shadows of the past have never dissipated. In 1955, the victory of the Third Reich was an indisputable reality. The swastika flew high, and Berlin stood like a beacon of Nazi power. Europe was under his oppressive rule, and entire nations were subjugated. But even in the deepest darkness, the flame of resistance still burned. They were few, but they were fearless. Men and women who never lost hope, who believed that freedom was an inalienable right that no regime could deny. They gathered in the shadows, in the depths of the night, sharing the fire of determination. These unsung heroes, men and women, were humanity's last line of defense against the darkness. In the middle of Nazi rule, the lives of ordinary people turned into a nightmare. Fear was omnipresent, a constant shadow that hung over every aspect of their lives. Surveillance, relentless and merciless, whispered the threat of reprisals at any moment. The fundamental values we know, the principles that support freedom and justice, have been suppressed. In its place, a ruthless ideology was imposed. Ideology poisoned children's minds, shaping their worldviews, and schools taught a distorted version of reality. A racial cleansing would occur, with millions facing discrimination, slavery, and death. Southern European citizens and others with darker skin and shorter stature, who did not meet Aryan standards, would be considered inferior and therefore discriminated against. Untermensch, the term used by the Nazis to refer to inferior non-Aryan peoples, would suffer most. There would likely be an ethnic cleansing of the world's Jews, Gypsies and Slavs, to name a few. The Holocaust would be even worse. Those who were physically and mentally disabled were also likely to be killed. So did anyone who wasn't heterosexual or anyone who opposed the regime. Non-Japanese Africans and Asians would be killed or forced into slavery. Just like the people of Central and South America, the world would probably be devoid of religion. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party were known for their hostility toward religion. Religion would probably have no place in the Third Reich, although the world would be a much worse place if the Axis powers had won World War II. No doubt some positive things would inevitably happen. The regime invested heavily in technology and science. We would likely see advances on several fronts, including mechanics and aeronautics. In fact, many Nazi scientists ended up working for the US government after the war. Now it's time for a very welcome reality check. The truth is that it would be very unlikely that the Axis powers would have won the war. Now let's find out why. For starters, the British had one of the largest armies in the world. Let's not forget all the nations of the British Empire and Commonwealth. They had multiple strategic bases spread across the world and were armed with a massive supply of heavy artillery. The Red Army dominated the Eastern Front and contained the expansion of the Axis powers. They were right at the Nazis' door and pressed them hard. Hitler had a powerful and huge transcontinental country fighting against him. After the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941, the US became involved in the war. Unfortunately for Hitler, the Americans were strong and had many resources. Geographically speaking, the US was also fortunate to be far from all the action in Europe, so that it could continue manufacturing and supplying the Allies with weapons, tanks, aircraft, ships. China, France, and many other Allied combatant nations, including resistance troops in occupied territories, certainly kept Hitler on his toes. In reality, the Nazis were trying to bite off more than they could chew. It was only a matter of time before the Axis powers were defeated. And should the Axis powers miraculously declare victory, it would only last until the US deployed its Convair B-36 Peacemaker, the first intercontinental bomber, which could easily hit Berlin. And if that wasn't enough, in 1948, both the US and the Soviet Union had a huge arsenal of atomic bombs, certainly enough to make the Axis powers surrender. This hypothetical scenario would unfortunately be horrible for the world and the people in the occupied territories. I hope you enjoyed this alternative history video, and why not subscribe? New videos are waiting for you every day. Thanks.